I want to welcome you to the most remarkable journey you will ever take. We have long wondered about the mysteries behind the resurrection of the dead, or the transformation of human to divine. We have asked ourselves these questions. Why am I human? Where are we going as a human race? Why did God create us? In these next 26 weeks, we're going to learn the answers to these questions. We're also going to learn about the powers that lie within us, that creativity that enables us to prophesy, to heal, and to discern. Our sailing vessel that will take us from earth to the heavens is known and called the Nautilus. If you remember, the sea creature is one which always closes and seals off its chambers as it outgrows it and builds a new one. And we must do the same thing. For we must cease being what we are in order to become something different. And like the Nautilus, we must leave behind our old ideas and concepts. So please join me on this very wondrous journey. I'm your hostess, Elizabeth MacDonald Burrows. Welcome to another journey aboard the Nautilus, which takes us, of course, from earth to heaven. We left off last week with a discussion of health and nutrition, and we'll be returning to that. And remember, we were doing health and nutrition in such a manner as to relate to the transmutation of this organovegetative body, rather than just coming up with a lot of health, food ideas and concepts. Because it's very important through this process of transformation of human to divine that the body also be changed. And one of the primary reasons for that, of course, is, and we've probably talked about this in other episodes, but the more dense the body is, the more contrary the mind is to the ways of natural and cosmic law. In other words, when the spirit descends to live in the flesh, and of course he is light, his vibration is very high, very fast, a very fast frequency, where we then, with our dense bodies, gross and a more slow-moving frequency. This causes greater turmoil or war, that great and famous Armageddon battle. So we find that as we purify the body, there is less, not only resistance to the ways of spirit, but there's less conflict with spirit, and a greater harmony remains between the two vibrations. We also, as we looked at it, realized that it has many advantages for us in so far as increasing our mental capability, and of course definitely easing pain and healing more rapidly. These are all aspects that we looked at. But before continuing on with the very final dispensation of health and nutrition, I did want to introduce you to some other things. We're going to take a look at Jesus' teachings on this aspect. In the Secret Testament of Jesus, also known as the Unknown Gospel of John the Beloved, the first two-thirds almost of the manuscript, or half of it, perhaps even two-thirds, is mostly based on his teachings on health and healing. And I have to include healing because he used the body as a holy temple of God, and therefore all of his healing was not just done with the laying of the hands, but was also done by him taking people, very sick people, to the rivers and to the streams where they could fast, where they could wash and cleanse themselves and eat in a different manner than they would normally eat, in order to bring the impurities to the surface of the body and wash them away. So some of his healing was done in this fashion as he dealt with those who were very, very ill and had things like tapeworms. And we talked about all of this also in the process of doing our series on the Secret Testament. But I wanted to review on that just a little bit and to introduce it into our course or class here today, and to show you that the part that we're going to be covering in the manuscript of the Secret Testament, this is the original Hebrew. The Secret Testament is not in here in entirety, but the health and food nutritional aspects are covered here in original Hebrew. And there are several pages, as I've so frequently mentioned. These were translated by the very infamous Professor Edmond Bordeaux-Zeke, who spoke 15 languages and was able to, of course, translate Hebrew and Aramaic as well as other languages. And of course he spoke 15 languages. This was known pretty much as the unknown manuscript from the archives of the Roman Vatican. Translated, of course, it's pretty much like this. And we are sorry that it's not in book form yet. It had been my intention to write the Secret Testament, to take the translations of Professor Zeke and to bring this book in such a form that it could be sold into the world today and be available to mass consciousness, because the original manuscript, of course, is housed in Aramaic and Hebrew in the archives, the secret archives of the Roman government. However, where my writing concerns, I have many other things that sometimes take priority, and there is another book that I'm currently working on that took priority over this one. So I am hoping that when I finish the one that I'm currently on, which was at the suggestion of one of my editors, I anticipate that I will get this written. In the meantime, I have it in notes where I can refer to it easily. Before going on, though, as I mentioned, to health and nutrition, I wanted to bring up those three paths that we constantly mention relating to oneness with God. What we want more than anything else in the world is this unitive state. We may not realize this is what we're seeking for. And we may have just simply in us an intangible feeling that we're supposed to do something, that we're hunting for something. We sometimes reflect this in the hunting of a beloved, the man for the perfect woman, or the perfect woman for the perfect man. And of course, we may look the world over, and man will not find the woman that is perfect, and the woman will not find the man that is perfect, unless we deem that all human beings are perfect. I remember one time with Swami Chinmayananda, who was a great teacher of the East, and he wrote to me one time and he said, "Elizabeth, I don't believe you love me. You don't love me enough yet." This perplexed me, and I puzzled on it for a long time, maybe 2 or 3 years before I finally responded to that specific issue. And finally I wrote back and I said, "Swami, I believe I am beginning to love you enough because I am perceiving your imperfections to be perfect." Each person is perfect for their own and personal degree of progression. And it is very difficult for us to perceive that perfection as we get to know someone better and better. Very easy in the beginning. We only see the good, the happy, the part that attracts us. And then as we get to know them better, we find these things that are adverse to the way we feel. So as a result of this, we have many marriages that are breaking up. We are feeling empty inside and lonely inside. And what we've always sought for is unity with God, because that is one with ourselves, since we are a cell in the body of God and we have a part of His Spirit in us. We cannot be happy unless we're in unity with that Spirit, and we can be almost happy if we're in harmony with it. So there were always three paths, whether we walked Jesus' path, which was love, power, and wisdom, or whether you walked an Indian path, which was bhakti, bhakti, karma, jnana yoga. And actually, they are the same. Jesus taught love, which in the East was bhakti. He taught power, which is in the East, of course, action is the reflection of power, karma yoga. And Jesus taught wisdom. And wisdom is the same in jnana yoga, or the union through the intellect. So the three paths, whether we walk them in East or West, are exactly the same. So I'm going to bring up, of course, that question to you: are you meditating every day? We mentioned that this is very serious business, that if we do not meditate every day, then we are not giving God a part of ourselves. We don't care enough to reach that great state of union. I know that we really want to, and I know that there are 1,000 different things that carry us away in the outside world: our work, our children, our families. Our duties are very heavy in the human world, and I know it's very hard to relegate that time which is necessary for meditation. But you know, if you will do it, you will find that your day will go so much better, that you'll be so much happier. Everything in your life will be smoother, and everything will start working out. These very problems that have been plaguing you will suddenly start working themselves out, because God is taking more of an interest in your life, because you are taking more of an interest in His life. And that doesn't mean that He sits up there and says, oh boy, I'm going to give them a lot of trouble because they don't like me and they're not paying any attention to me, but more because we are drawn by law of attraction. So therefore, if we are not focused and centered in God, then how can He be centered in us? He doesn't have a brain with which to think. He must use our mind. That part of Him that is with us must use our mind in order to help us with our actions. So when we are far removed from Him, we just have more problems in life. And when we are more in harmony with Him, we have less problems. And He is there, that consciousness of His then is drawn by us through law of attraction, and is capable then of working out many more things than what we would expect. So meditation is a path of bhakti, love and devotion. The other part, of course, of love and devotion is a part of serving Him. And serving Him can be done in so many ways. We don't have to be a minister, and we don't have to be a teacher. Living His ways in everything that we do. And for this reason, I brought out traditional scripture today. You know, I like to do that once in a while, just to let the world know that I still read the Bible every night and enjoy my studies with it and learn something new all the time. But I am always fascinated with, when we go into St. Matthew, of course, chapter 5, as we began this Sermon on the Mount. We simply spend so much time quoting Scripture, condemning others because they're not walking a Christian path, and yet we ourselves don't live the Christian path. Something similar to this was mentioned, of course, in Revelation, when John said, many of you call yourself Jews, but you are not Jews, because they were not doing the work of Moses. They were not doing what Moses told them to do. And it's essential for us, and very important, that we learn to live as the masters live, or to live in action. And so if we can just go a little bit here to the sermon. It said, blessed are they who do hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled. Does righteousness means that we should seek that which is right, or does it mean to condemn all others who are different than us? What does righteous mean? To me, it's seeking the path of the right, the path of the good, and living it. So it said, blessed are they who do hunger for it. So we should be hungry to walk the path of the good. It says, blessed are they who are poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Does this mean poverty? No. It said poor in spirit means humble before God. Are we humble before God? I think we are when we pray. We may even be so when we meditate. But are we humble before him in the actions that we do upon earth? It said, blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. Do we sorrow because we are separated from God? Most people think that mourn means that if we suffer a lot because of earthly things, or we lose a loved one, that we are blessed. And in a way, it's true. As we suffer, God comes to us to help to ease our suffering. But to mourn over our separation and our individualization, to be separate from him. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. I always like, or let's go a little bit before that. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Do we live every single day of our life mercifully? Are we merciful to all that we meet? How can we expect God to be merciful to us if we are not merciful to others? So we would be very busy just in one day being merciful until we learn and it becomes a part of the habits and the patterns. And it said, it's often thought that one cannot see God. I've talked about it in relationship to cosmic consciousness, but and that it is for all mankind, that I'm not a special person, and that I have seen God, and that Jesus has appeared, and many of the angelic being has appeared to me over the decades that I have walked the spiritual path. But Jesus mentions that everyone can see God if your heart is pure, if you love purely. Certainly my physical habits, my habits in the corporeal world were not what I would consider pure at the time I entered into cosmic consciousness. But if you remember, I also put God first and loved him more than anything else in the world and was willing to die for him. And so that was, I suppose, in a sense, pure of heart. And it said, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. I walk this world over. Every time we turn on television, we turn on computer games or watch some of the advertising on computer games, all we see is war and violence, arguing and dissension. We are unable to even pick a president without fighting and squibbling like children. And to walk earth and to be peaceful with everyone you meet, regardless of religion or creed or caste, how much of an effort. You see, what I'm going over right now are simply the Beatitudes, and we can't even live by those every day of our life. We have trouble being a peacemaker. We have difficulty not judging. And judging is condemnation or criticism. We criticize everyone, from the people that we work with in the office, to how the government is run, to the sins of the world, to people who are of different religions. And we really have to try to take these simple practices. When it said to do the work, it means to do these simple practices in life, to be peaceful with everyone and to comfort everyone who mourns, and to give more concern to others than to expect so much for ourselves. So it is. So we want and to bring peace. If we want peace upon earth, every one of us must become peaceful with all other people, and this is quite a task. And it was for this reason that Jesus often said to turn the other cheek, and and to cut off our right arm if we did something that offended ourselves, or to pluck out our right eye. People in ancient days took this so seriously that they actually plucked out their eye because they thought they were seeing sin. They maimed, they cut off their arms because they thought they had done something which was evil or wicked or vile, until the church made it a rule that no one could maim themselves anymore or desecrate the bodies. So we stopped doing that, but we take these things so literally, when in reality they are simple expressions of life that we walk through, we are merciful, and we are peaceful. God doesn't, nor did Jesus, say that we were only to be merciful to Christians. I mean, Christian, the word Christian hadn't even been born yet. We can't call Jesus a Christian because Christianity descended from him. The things that he taught ultimately spawned into a religion, but he himself was not a Christian because Christianity did not yet exist. So he found that people, even in his day, walked with condemnation and judgment and criticism. This brought war and anger throughout the world. And so when he said to turn the other cheek meant several things. One is we would not have the anger and hostile thoughts of that person directed toward us. We would not have this feeling in ourselves of separation, putting a wall between ourselves and someone else. And that's only the bare beginning of the Sermon on the Mount. And yet we can't even abide by the 7 Beatitudes. In fact, I'm not sure we can abide fully by the 10 Commandments. I believe they too would be alone sufficient for us to be occupied in doing good every day of our life. So I wanted to bring this up, that action doesn't have to be being a minister or a teacher or going out there and how should I put it, by serving God in that capacity. We serve him through every kind act that we do to another. We serve him through every peaceful smile that we give to another. We serve him even when we do our dishes at night, because we make the world cleaner. Just simply because we did our dishes, the whole world is cleaner because we lived. As long as we do those dishes, not because we're trying to have a clean house, not because we're doing them for our husband, not because we're doing them for ourselves, but because we're doing them to have a cleaner world in service of God. No matter what our task is, if we just do it for God, then it is a noble task and we are serving. And that is the second path, love, service or power. And then wisdom. We had mentioned studying and reading the books of great wisdoms and moving away from computer programs of violence and movies and shows of carnality and violence in order to clean up our minds so that we are able to be more peaceful and harmonious over the whole of earth. Well, I'll leave you with the study of the Sermon on the Mount, chapters 5, 6, and 7 of Matthew. That's enough to keep you going for years, I'm afraid, if you really, truly try to live it rather than to preach it and to talk about it. I work diligently at these things, and it's a constant effort to overcome the negativity and animosity of other people. Not just because it's aimed at me. We're constantly fed by news media and magazines and books and everything else. We're constantly fed a pattern of negativity, and we become negative. We almost become negative sometimes without realizing it. And when we become negative, then our life starts having many difficulties in it, and we don't understand. We think somebody's picking on us, the universe is picking on us because we're having all of these problems. Negativity draws these problems. So to go and move toward God is to work also our life out and to have a happier and better life. So service, and this is alone sufficient, although there are many other ways. You might be a writer. If you are a writer, you mustn't write books that bring horrible, violent scenes and carnal scenes to mankind. You want to write things learn to write things that's going to uplift mankind, to educate him, to make him grow in wisdom and understanding, and to make this a better world than what we live in. If you produce movies or videos, do them for the good of the whole. You know, we can put on many inspirational movies. We can put on music that are educational, beautiful and wondrous, filled with music and art and exploration of outer space. I'm not opposed to fiction, other than that sometimes we develop patterns of believing perhaps in a fictional world and not able to face the excitement of the reality of the world we live in. You know, our world is very much a reality. However, an exciting one. However, I have noticed that more and more publishing companies now are going in for nonfiction. So I believe that's a step in the right direction, because nonfiction helps us to educate or to train the mind in the process of growth and comprehension and understanding. Well, one day, the lion and the lamb, the lion representing the spirit and the lamb the soul, one day they will come into union, they will lay down together, and we will have peace on earth. And then, and only then, will the human race pass away. So I leave you with those words as we return to our world of health and nutrition. Jesus said, "I tell you truly, happy are those that do the laws of life and wander not upon the paths of death. For in them the forces of life wax strong, and they escape the plagues of death." And by this, when he talks about the laws of life, he's talking about obedience to the laws of nature. For instance, anything we cook is unnatural. The longer we cook it, the softer it gets. By this, that means the life force is leaving the food. You take string beans and you put them, here they are, very crisp, and then we break them and we put them in the pan and cook them. The longer we cook them, the softer they get. The softer they get means more and more of the life force is leaving them, and less of the life force is there to nourish us. So for this reason, Jesus taught in his health and nutritional aspects, he taught a lot about raw foods and uncooked foods. This does not mean you should go on a raw food diet. We have great need of protein, and this must be cooked. Whether our protein is in meat, though he did not recommend the eating of meat, as I mentioned before, we cannot make these changes in the world today overnight. We have to make them slowly. So you may still have meat in your diet. But if you don't, you need the grains and legumes in order to provide for you a good protein. Seems like every time we find a protein, though, we have a tendency to go into excess. And excess begins to bring on its complications. The tremendous surge on health food eating was to turn toward things made of soy. We looked toward tofu, which came out in mock turkey and mock jerky and all kinds of things, and every dish, rice dishes, everything, so many things with tofu in it. Yet it is found now that excessive tofu, or rather excessive soybean, helps to break down not the immune system but the thyroid system. And I myself, having eaten, of course, a lot of soy, found myself with low thyroid. And this is a very common thing. So anything that we do in excess, our most natural protein, of course, if we're not having any meat products or meat byproducts, is to mix a legume and a grain. And these have to be cooked. I can't imagine trying to bite into an uncooked bean. Or peas, that would be easier. Corn, of course, corn on the cob, that is easier. So Jesus taught a lot about raw foods. And this was because when he took the people that he healed, he took them to the rivers and to the streams. And this was for their purification. And the fastest way for him to get these people well was, of course, to have them fast and to go on raw foods, which would bring out the impurities of the body. So, and then many sick and maimed came to Jesus asking him, "If you know all things, tell us, why do we suffer with these grievous plagues? And why are we not like other men?" And for those who have been ill with so many cancer and leukemia and almost blind. Have we not all asked, why do we have to suffer with these plagues? It says, Master, help us that we too may be made strong and need abide no longer in our misery. We know that you have it in your power to heal all manners of disease. Free us from Satan and from his great afflictions. Master, have compassion on us. And Jesus answered, Happy are you that you hunger for the truth, for I will satisfy you with the bread of wisdom. Happy are you that you knock, and I will open the door of life. Happy are you that you would cast off the power of Satan. And of course he speaks of Satan here, which is taken from the word natal or birth. And anything then that destroys, like natal or birth, anything that feeds it is life. Anything that destroys it reverses, almost is a reversal of spelling, as referred to as Satan or our lesser nature. That part of us that moves in through desire, is drawn by attraction to the outside corporeal world through the senses. So Satan is not a deity, as I've often referred to him to my students. He is not this red-suited, this man in a red suit of underwear that wandered through medieval Christianity, who later got changed from devil or deity into Satan or a power. When Jesus speaks of Satan, he's talking about anything that will destroy life in us. Natal, again, natal or birth, anything that destroys birth. And it would have been impossible for the people of his time to understand the term forces or power. How could they understand that the sun is an aspect of creation, that it is a cell in the body of God, that God is an entire universe? In those days, they had a certain sense of the size of the universe. They did not have the achievements that we had today to have perused and to study the sky with the intensity of astronomy in today's world. So now, I have no idea in Jesus' time how many galaxies they thought we had. And now, of course, they range from anywhere from 100 billion galaxies to 150, whatever, but or to 1 billion galaxies. So our concept of the universe has broadened from the time that Jesus taught. And so these people would not be able to understand in those days the sun is a power, but they could understand that the sun is an angel. Somebody lives up in the sun who will tend us if we commune with the sun. If we meditate upon it and we draw, then this angel that is in the sun will answer us and will come forth and heal us. This was the way people could understand. So we couldn't say, here, you have a lower nature. That was a part of the mysteries of the great initiates of those times. This was not passed on to mass consciousness because they would not have comprehended it. But they could understand that there was somebody out there that might be making them feel bad or to do things. A part of them that made them do things that they didn't want to do. So thus they could understand the term Satan, just as they could understand angel of the sun or angel of the wind. So Jesus used liberally the word Satan to represent that destruction. So it said you cast off the power of Satan. We're talking about death and old age and sickness. And so they asked him, they said, who is our mother and which are her angels and which is her kingdom? And Jesus answered truly. He said, I tell you truly that your mother is in you and you in her. She bore you. She gave you life. It was she who gave you your body, and to her you will one day give it back. Happy are you when you come to know her and her kingdom, if you will receive your mother's angels and do her laws. I tell you truly, he who does these things never sees disease, for the power of our mother is above all. So that's if we could go back to time before population was as great as it is today, before we had created great vehicles, which in turn create pollution, before part of the ozone layer is gone, before our rivers and streams were contaminated. We could live in this simple way of natural food and not see illness. But that is not possible for us today. Everything that we eat is contaminated, even if it's organic. It is less contaminated if it's organic. But the pollution is rampant. It floats in the air. The wind carries it from place to place. It drops into the soil. So it is very difficult to find any place, or would be literally impossible to find any place it could grow food that would be absolutely and totally uncontaminated. So our ability to be healthy is not the same as it was in those days. But what we can do because of our world today is we can remain more healthy by eating more natural foods. He talks about that the blood that runs in us is the blood born of our earthly mother. It was interesting that Jesus took the water and communed with the force of water, or had taught the people to commune with the angel of water, to bring it into the heart, to draw deeply and to bring the water into the heart and disperse it through the bloodstream, because he equated the veins and arteries to the great ocean of the heart. And my favorite, of course, meditation or communion with this is to image myself sitting by a mighty ocean. And as I take a deep breath and close my eyes to bring that water into the heart. And as we get more proficient at this, we actually cease to exist, and we become actually the water itself. We just feel ourselves as waves crashing upon the shore, going back out on the tides again. All this is an integral part of this great, beautiful power that we had, and that this actually purifies the bloodstream. And so it also means that we should drink an abundance of water. We've talked about this, that 70 to 80% of our body is water, and that if we don't drink water to flush the river, this mighty ocean that holds the cells of our bodies, if we don't drink enough water, this begins to build up contamination. Because if you've ever gone to a river or stream and you've seen over here a pool that's been cut off by the river or stream and becomes stagnant with slimy green stuff on it, you know that it breeds diseases and mosquitoes which carry diseases and things like this. So this means that we too become stagnant, that if we don't continue to use our mind, if we don't continue to eat right, if we don't make some efforts in this way, we become like a stagnant pond, and pretty soon we breed diseases. And if we don't drink enough water to keep that water moving through us, we also create toxins in the body, which in turn brings us diseases and abets and increases our aging process. And we age much more rapidly. So I'm going to take now the chart off of the board, and we're going to go back to where we were last week and take a look at Cellutron, who is here, ready to teach us a bit more about cell life. We had some really marvelous little creatures here with us last week. We had Chicken Little, we had Charlie the tuna, we had Happy the clam, and of course we had Drowser, which is our steak. We hadn't quite gotten to Drowser yet, I think, when we left off last week, but the first thing, as we mentioned, that really needs to be replaced in the diet is that wonderful crab and lobster and shrimp and raw fish. Maybe not so much raw fish if it's not bottom fish, but nevertheless, our clams, our lobsters, our shrimp are the scavengers of the sea, and they clean up the seabeds so that other life form in the sea will be able to live more easily. And I don't think we would eat an albatross or a seagull or a vulture. All are scavengers and necessary, and they help clean up the earth. Now, we perhaps don't think about that, but you know, scavengers are that which come along in their great herds and clean up the earth for us and kind of clean up after us. So we wouldn't think much about doing that, but we wouldn't hesitate to eat shrimp and lobster. So we encourage people to get rid of those things first. And then the next thing that we encourage them to remove from their diet is that of pork. Pork is very hard on the digestive system. It is a very, normally a very contaminated meat. I myself was raised on a farm. And even though in the farm areas where pigs are fed better food than they might be fed when you raise them for slaughter, pigs are just dirty. I mean, it's almost impossible to keep their pens clean. They also don't care what they eat, and as a result of this, is a normal rule, the pork is a more unclean meat. Even Moses was against eating anything with a cloven hoof. So we recommend the removal of pork, and you really won't miss that much. In reality, you might miss your lobster and shrimp. That's pretty addictive, but I don't think you'll miss the pork very much. Beef would be the third thing on the line, and that's because there are 7 toxins which are disease conducive, and we do so many things with this. We mentioned last time that one charcoal broiled steak does the damage to the body that 32 packages of cigarettes does, simply because the charcoal is poison and permeates the steak as we cook it. And then many people like their meat rare, and that doesn't help to reduce the toxic elements that's in the beef. It was concluded that fowl, chicken, and turkey, and fish were probably still among the most pure, and chickens, because the feathers do ward off some of the outside contamination. But of course, again, what we buy in the markets is often been fed hormones. So we are not quite certain when we buy our beef or we buy our chicken that we're not buying substances that have been administered to them, which is not natural. In other words, we can't assure ourselves they've been grain-fed and open-ranged, which would be much more to our benefit. We can only try to be careful about those things in our purchase. But as I told you, we may remain with our meat and meat products, but try to increase your vegetables. Try to get rid of some of the sugar that you're eating. Sweets are tremendously hard to overcome, but we don't have to do it all at once. The Altadena honey sweetened ice cream is wonderful. There are even fudge toppings and caramel toppings that are sweetened with fruit juice sweetener. We can get fruit juice sweetened cookies. By the way, they're wonderful. I make honey chocolate chip cookies that would just melt in your mouth. They're fabulous, and make them with honey and with lots of nuts, and as well as sugar-free chocolate chips, which are fruit juice sweetened. So we can start bringing in substitutes of these items. Almost many of the major supermarkets, at least, now are handling health food items, such as fruit juice sweetened cookies and honey ice cream and things like this, and yogurt, of course. So let's start substituting. And there's nothing better than fresh strawberries, for instance, with just a little touch of cream on them and a touch of honey. That's a wonderful dessert. And so look in that direction of just bringing your diets up to be more healthy. You'd be shocked to read the labels on things. In so many of the frozen food departments and packaged foods, we find the use of monosodium glutamate, one of the worst chemicals that we could possibly find. Just to get into monosodium glutamate is within 30 minutes, there's a flush, there's a raise in blood pressure, at least with me. There is now after 30 years of a pretty natural diet, and headaches and sleepiness and shortness of breath and palpitation of the heart. If it does this to me within 30 minutes after I've eaten it, if you think it's not doing it to you, you're wrong. You may not notice it as predominantly, but that's the effect that monosodium glutamate has. And every Oriental restaurant uses monosodium glutamate as an enhancement, a food enhancer. And so when you go into an Oriental restaurant, have them just hold the monosodium glutamate, because there are many things in the Oriental foods that are good. They use a certain amount of fat in the sautéing, but you're eating a lot of rice, you're eating a lot of vegetables. But you need to have them leave out the monosodium glutamate. It's not going to taste quite as good, but you... and soy sauce, the kind that's normally used in the outside world, has sugar in it. So therefore, I'm more tendency to go toward tamari, which is a bit stronger than soy sauce, much purer. It's the same thing. It just hasn't been diluted down, and most of all, it doesn't have sugar added to it. Almost every loaf of bread that you buy has sugar added. Almost every, I've gone through container after container of rolls, sugar added. So not only what we're consciously eating in form of candies and pies and cakes, we're getting all of the hidden sugars also. And this is causing, is tremendously instrumental in intensifying the potentiality for senility or dementia. You take someone who has Alzheimer's disease and you take them out to eat, and they want abundance of sugar. They want sweet things. This tells us something. We start our children on sweets at almost from the time they're born. Every year, as they grow and continue their participation in sweets, the addiction becomes stronger and stronger and more powerful, and is passed on from generation to generation. And of course, like all things, you want things to taste sweeter, you have to add more to it because you become accustomed to it at a certain level. After you go off of sugar for a while, and then you go back, you can hardly stand it because it's so sweet. And also 1 teaspoon of sugar now, after all this time, well, is just almost enough to put me to sleep for 12 or 13 hours, a wonderful sleeping medicine. So it tells us it is a drug, and that it is addictive, and that we are better to find things that are sugar-free, to go to look at sweet substitutes. And that doesn't mean chemical substitutes either, sweeteners that are made up chemically. I'm trying to remember what this sweetener was that they used to use in some of the drink, NutraSweet. What they didn't, and they'd say, oh, it's so natural. It's from the cow and it's from nature. They didn't tell you they put it together with wood alcohol. One day I was, my apartment, the woman that was managing the apartment or owned the apartments where I was staying while I was on one of my United States tour, she said, I just feel terrible. And she said, I don't know what's the matter with me. And so I sat down and started talking to her, and I asked her, I said, well, is there anything that you have been eating the last couple of days that you don't normally eat? And she said, well, she'd been drinking a lot of pop. And I said, is it sweetened with NutraSweet? And she said, yes. And I said, well, what you have is a NutraSweet hangover. I said, just get off of the pop with the NutraSweet on it, and you'll be just fine in a day or two. She was actually having mental, inability to think, hyper, things weren't going right. And all this on a simple thing like NutraSweet. So find a natural product, honey. Even Jesus said the honey of bees and the milk of beasts were good for us. So we can simplify our diet. I mean, just have a little bit healthier diet and not worry too much about eliminating all of the meat and meat products that we have. We talked about last week about how when we have two cells and one is purified and another one is impure, how the process of thinking, we looked at the brain, how the brain, thought coming, impressing itself upon a brain, a very toxic brain, moves very slowly, and therefore leaving the person with that quick ability to think well. They might come up with a thought, but it may not be a good thought. And then how, when we go into the more purified body, that the thought process is more immediate, and that we would increase our IQ probably by about 30% or so, just by simply changing our diet and purifying our body, which was a very good remark to make for young people. And how the pain, when the body is highly toxic, the pain is more intense, and how when the body is purified, the pain is lighter, and also the body heals itself. You see, the body, we don't give it credit so much for being able to draw from these natural forces. The cell is part water, and it means it needs hydrogen, it needs oxygen, it needs the rain, it needs the air, it needs the sunlight, and each cell starts and tries to regenerate itself from these forces of nature, from the grass and the trees, the flowers, the sunlight and the rain. And thus, if the body is purified, the cell is more receptive to those forces of nature. Where if the cell is highly toxic or filled with toxins, anything that it may draw to sustain itself is going to be more difficult for it to do, because it just has to work so much harder to get the same regeneration that a cell from a purified body would get. And it is for this reason that the aging process is highly increased when we have toxic body, because it cannot regenerate itself as quickly. So therefore it ages more quickly. And even though we may change cells every 7 years, we're not changing every cell every 7 years. There's just a constant fluctuation of change taking place in us. And these cells, when they become overworked, they begin to die. They just can't put themselves out there to do the work that's necessary to sustain the body. And so it increases the aging process. And how many of us, as we get older, are not going to wish that we looked younger and felt younger? My friends, old age is a state of mind. If you exercise, if you take care of your diet, and if you think good thoughts and you go around the world doing the very best you can to be kind and understanding and tolerant of all people, I promise you that when you get 70 years old, like I am, you will not feel like you're over 40. You do not have to get old, and you can have a clarity of mind that will give you quality life as long as you live. God bless and keep you. I'll be back with you aboard the Nautilus next week.